All right, we're going to begin our discussion of the Mexican Revolution with a number of lectures on the course of the revolution, i.e. the chronological chain of events. And then we'll go back and talk about some themes and ideas after that. And the first lecture in this course is Mexico from independence up through a period known as the Porfiriato, which was the period immediately preceding the revolution. Almost 300 years after New Spain was created, on September 16th, 1810, independence from Spain was declared by a priest named Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. I'm going to butcher a lot of these names because I don't hablo de Español like y'all do. This Declaration of Independence, and by the way, that's important, 1810, because the revolution that we're speaking of will begin in 1910, which is the centennial celebration also of Mexico's independence. So this declaration in 1810 led to a long war that ended finally in 1821, which eventually led to independence and the creation of an empire, the first Mexican empire. The empire's territory encompassed the area of all the current Mexican Republic, as well as much of present-day western U.S. states and all current Central American countries, except for Panama and Belize. Agustin de Iturbide was the first and only emperor. This empire only lasted 2 years when he was deposed by Republican-minded forces. After Iturbide was deposed, the Central American states separated, forming something called the Federal Republic of Central America. They would divide up even further later. In 1824, a Republican Constitution was drafted, creating the United Mexican States. The first 4 decades, unfortunately, after the creation of the country were marked by constant strife between two forces, liberals and conservatives. Not quite what you think of today as liberals and conservatives, although that's not too far off. Liberals were largely people who supported the federal form of government stipulated in the 1824 Constitution. Federal in the sense that it meant shared power between states and the central government. It was modeled on the U.S. Constitution. The conservatives proposed a hierarchical form of government in which all local authorities were appointed and subject to a central authority in Mexico City. Now, Mexican politics in the 19th century were dominated by 3 really big men. And big man number 1 was General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. You already know him. Strong influence in Mexican politics. He was a centralist, a conservative. He was president several times. Several secessionist movements broke out against Santa Anna. Only one succeeded, of course, and that was the Republic of Texas. They were able to defeat him, and later the United States annexed Texas. This created a border dispute about just how big Texas was. That led to the Mexican-American War. Santa Anna played a big role in trying to muster Mexican forces, but this war resulted in the defeat of Mexico, as you know, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 meant that Mexico lost 1/3 of its surface area, which went to the United States, the Mexican Cession. In part, dissatisfaction with Santa Anna and his very dictatorial rule led to an era of liberal reforms known as La Reforma, or the Reform, after which a new constitution was drafted in 1857, and this constitution reestablished federalism, shared power, local and central, as the form of government, and it first introduced freedom of religion. It preferred no religion. The Catholic Church hated this, and in fact, this Constitution and many of the liberals were anti-clerical, anti-church. More about that later. A civil war between liberals and conservatives led to a liberal victory under President Benito Juárez. He is big man number 2 and the most admirable of these 3 big men in Mexican history. One thing Juárez did when he gained power was reneged on some foreign debt. He said, look, we're poor, we owe this money, we can't pay it right now, so we're just going to stop paying right now. This greatly angered the French and the British, who held most of the debt. In retaliation, the French Emperor Napoleon III, this was during the era of the Second French Empire, this is in the 1860s, he decides, you know what, we're going to put a puppet government in charge in Mexico that I control. And he proposes to make a Habsburg Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian of Austria, who is the younger brother, by the way, of the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph from 1848 to 1916, you'll recall. He proposed making him the emperor of Mexico, and he becomes Emperor Maximilian I. And with the support of the Catholic clergy, the conservative Mexicans, and the Mexican nobility. This second Mexican empire ruled only for a few years when Juárez managed to restore the republic in 1867. Juárez fought a civil war against Maximilian, who was executed, by the way. You may want to wonder, and we'll discuss later, why the U.S. allowed this flagrant violation of the Monroe Doctrine. Benito Juárez, unfortunately, died in office 5 years after restoring the republic. And he was succeeded by a Republican general who fought with him during the French intervention, Porfirio Díaz. He is big man number 3, and his on-again, off-again 30-year rule is why we label the 30 years before the revolution the Porfiriato. Díaz grew up in the southern state of Oaxaca. He was a mestizo, mixed Indian and European blood, mostly Mixtec Indian, which is unusual that he was so powerful. He joined the army and proved to be fearless under fire. He was captured in the war against the French, but escaped and returned to lead his unit. When he became president in 1877, he became ruler of one of the most backward nations on earth. While Europe and the U.S. had developed elaborate factory systems, aggressively industrializing, Mexico did not even possess a modern railroad. Other Latin nations, such as Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Cuba, were far ahead of Mexico in industrial progress because Mexico had lost ground due to 6 decades of political warfare. Now, Díaz intended to keep peace and order so that he could correct this situation and bring economic development to Mexico. That's important. That's his number one goal. And to end the mutinies and civil wars, which had plagued Mexico for decades, Díaz famously offered his rivals the choice of pan o palo, the bread or the club. Work with me and be rewarded, or fight with me and you will be beaten down. He ruthlessly and quickly killed many military men who also desired to be president. Still, political executions were relatively rare in the Díaz years because he kept control with a combination of fear and rewards. Soon, all of Mexico's state governments were run by Díaz's hand-picked men. Elections were held, but he had these people called the jefes políticos, the political bosses, who stuffed ballot boxes and rigged results. In one state, prisoners were put to work marking ballots assembly line style. Díaz also similarly controlled Congress, once gratefully offering a seat to a dentist who cured his toothache. Díaz believed that democracy was an empty dream in a country where only 15% of the people could read and write. He had a point, but instead of investing in education, which he said we can't afford, he focused every penny and every effort relentlessly on industrialization. And during the Porfiriato, 9,000 miles of railroad track were laid. The output of mines increased threefold. The value of exports increased fivefold. Laws were passed by Díaz which encouraged the growth of huge commercial-like plantations which produced coffee, sugar, cotton, tobacco, rubber. We see the imposition of scientific management. Steel plants, steel industry was created in Nuevo León, and textile industry, textile mills were created in Veracruz. Díaz employed tough-on-crime policies. He subdued the highway bandits that had plagued travelers in Mexico for decades. This was, after all, a major disruption to the economy. He did so largely by turning the toughest bandit gangs into policemen. They became the infamous rurales, the rural police, and produced the safest roads on earth with skills learned as lifetime bandits. By law, the rurales were forbidden to execute prisoners, but there was something called the ley fuga, the fugitive law, which allowed them to legally kill those attempting to escape. And during the Díaz administration, about 10,000 people were killed trying to escape. I'm using air quotes here.